If I asked you to get a piece of paper and something to write with, and to make a numerical list of all the things that you would be willing to die for, how long is your list?
Panther 48.
Willing to die for.
Panther 48.
Willing to die for. How long is your list?
What is the tribal self?
Panther 48.
The tribal self is what goes above the immediate acquaintances of the social.
Willing to die
The
for.
family, the people you know, live next door.
You would be willing to die for.
Tribal self.
Panther 48.
I'm talking about those movies, those yet unheard.
Tonight, we definitely want to make sure we have a good interactive class. We got instructor that's going to be going through some things. This is one of those ones where it's just going to challenge us to dig deep into ourselves and really answer, self-reflect and look into what is it that we need to change about ourselves and how we approach things moving forward in our life. So without further ado, let me go ahead and bring on Dr. Brianna Simmons to go ahead and introduce yourself and get us going into the class.
Thank you for the introduction and for inviting me here. I'm so excited to be able to contribute and meet folks who are interested in this kind of awareness and work. I have a fireplace kind of playing in the background, and you can call me Brianna. Bree is fine too, pronouns she, her. My profession right now, I'm assistant prof of Black Studies at San Diego City College, but my background is in medical anthropology, global anti-Blackness, and Black children's well-being, particularly in the Inland Empire, Trinidad, and Kenya. Today, what I'm going to be trying to facilitate is a larger conversation about how anti-Blackness sediments, what this vocabulary is, and open a discussion about our awareness and understanding of it. And as Robert was also saying, what is it that we can do when we are aware of how it's showing up in our lives? That's what I'm here for too. I think a lot of our study, there's important study that happens individually, and then you get to see how much that's actually been integrated in community as well. So grateful to be here with all of you. I'm going to be sharing my screen and have some visuals and a PowerPoint that can be made available later. But I would invite, if it's helpful for you to take notes, to have something to take notes with, or just track any kind of questions or things that are coming up for you. The style of this will be back and forth between me sharing some information and then having some questions and conversation with a larger discussion portion at the end. So if you can't see my screen or you need me to read aloud or share something again, please let me know and I will pause without any problems there. Okay.
We can.
Sorry, my Zoom is lagging, so let me give this a second. Okay, it's up on my screen. Can everyone in attendance see this?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, awesome. So today's conversation, I've titled it this because I'm going to try and explain or introduce the conceptual vocabulary of anti-Blackness through the allegory of the Matrix, and this was shared through a table that's an excerpt of a larger article that uses the 1999 video or movie The Matrix to give distinction to the frameworks of racism and anti-Blackness. And so my intention is both to share that and lay out in a bare bones kind of way how this is different, how this changes our political decisions, and connect that to PTSS, which you may have heard, you may not, which is an acronym for post-traumatic slave syndrome, coined by Dr. Joy Degree, about the ways that intergenerational effects of anti-Blackness show up in our body and shape our responses. So this is an attention both to the external and internal composite structure of anti-Blackness. And it'll be a challenging way to reframe a lot of what we already know. Okay, so we've gone through this part. This is going to be our flow for the remainder. So we have two major kinds of new pieces. Hopefully they were shared with you. If not, we'll go through it in this time. So after that, we'll have a short break if you need to get water, take notes, then discuss and collectively assess what are important next steps. So I've stated my intentions, but I think it's important because a lot of this language, I think, is coming from what's happening on the streets, but it gets circulated in spaces that disconnect themselves from the community. So to me, it's important that the language that's used here is actually helpful in solving the problems that we face on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so we've checked in, and now I want to ask you all, at this point, and it's a questions we'll come back to during our discussion, what does centering Black folks mean? And what do you feel are the roots of the issues facing Black people today?
What I will say is, for me, centering Black voices means rejecting some of the rhetoric that doesn't come from us, right? So as we look at specifically some of the conversations around DEI, around anything that has to do with woke or language that we produce, culture that we produce, rejecting any synopsis of or any meaning of our words that don't come from us. And then what are in the roots of issues that Black people are facing today? I think obviously colonialism, capitalism based on that.
But my first answer to the first question would be, what does centering Black folks mean? This is just my opinion, but from how I feel, I would say like centering Black folks to me, from my perspective, would be pretty much overgeneralizing us, like stereotyping us, like whether it be like stereotypes that you see on TV, in the news, in the media, maybe comments like racial undertone that has something to do with stereotypes, whether, for example, pants sagging, tattoos, drug dealers, gangbangers, like stuff like that we see, that I see daily out here where I live down here in the South. I would say stuff like that would be what I see when I think of centering Black folks, like just over like stereotypes and overgeneralizations. The second part to the second question, I would say, what do I feel the roots of Black issues? I mean, the issues that Black people are facing today. I would have to say, we see a lot of gender wars going on. I see a lot of that. You know, the media tries to put the Black male versus the female. You see a lot of that, whether it's the feminism movement, whether it's the, you know, the MGTOW, whatever they call it, the manosphere. You see some of that going on as well, like a divide there. Also, you know, the police brutality is ongoing. Colonialism, capitalism, things of that sort as well. So I would say those things. Those are what's come to mind, just to say a faithful few that I see on a day-to-day where I'm at.
Okay, thanks for sharing. Other thoughts? I think there's some in the chat.
Yeah, I think about centering Black folks. One thing that comes to mind is context and grace, in the sense of normalcy. I feel like a lot of times that's stripped, you know, especially in a place where white America is like a standard of living. It's kind of absurd or abstract to think about our livelihood in a sense of normalcy, or, you know, the myriad of what Blackness means. It's not necessarily monolithic, but when you think about what normalcy means and what that means to us, I think it's important to center us in the right kind of light. And a lot of that, well, I guess modern times or right now is met with the reverse racism card of like, okay, but if y'all can do this, or you can center your blackness and I can center my whiteness, and I think it removes the context of the reason that we have to for survival. Uh, Roots to the issues, besides being systematic and systemic, again, it comes with context, and I think it behooves us to know our history, and know policy and what we're dealing with, so we can connect the dots. That way, we don't feel like we need to reinvent the wheel. And I think a big chunk of that comes through cross generational, and connecting the dots between the young and the old.
Sorry, go ahead, James. Thank you for sharing, Chief.
Black power. Hey, you know, sister, I think just to generalize both in one, we just need to dictate our moral altitude. I think we need to find our ethics and values that dictate our actions and just ground ourselves there. You see what I'm saying? I think a lot of times we make decisions from the wrong energy, or we receive the understanding from the wrong energy. Like we might be angry at something that happened, you know, and so we want to attack the situation. You see what I'm saying? With, how can I say, inadequate strategies. And so I think we just got to start back morally and work on our values and ethics and just go from there. So I yield there, my dear sister.
Yeah, there's a lot to work with here, a lot that I'm in agreement, and I think that we can revisit and kind of push some of what we mean by different kind of phrasing, like to be centered in the right light, and what it is to actually find our ethics too. And we'll come back to this in the discussion. I see some folks in the chat also shared that having cultural humility and honoring ancestry being important, and I'm thinking the roots being spiritual, mental, physical, and historical violence against Black people. So I feel like we're all on the right track, and not to say that I know everything, I do not, but I am interested in pushing us to precision, right? When we say we need to be aware of what's going on, what's going on, right? What is the language that we can summon to explain the relationship between seemingly disconnected and separate places, right? Some being in San Diego, some being in the South, some being in Africa, some being, you could be in Korea, right? How is it that these things are related? And so that's some of the language that I hope we can come into today. So thank you all for sharing. I'm sure there's other kinds of memories or experiences or questions coming up. Do keep track of them and bring them back when we have more of our discussion periods. Okay, so moving on and just double checking everyone can see my screen with the slides.
Yes.
Okay, great. So moving on, I want to try and introduce PTSS in a very surface level way. There's a lot that we could continue to talk about here, but I just want to introduce the language and kind of kick up some of the ways this may be showing up in our own lives, our interior lives, right? Not necessarily the way you get read and what you experience and the outward coming into you, but how it is that you make sense of the world, right? And in a larger question for me, this is about what is well-being to the slave, right? What we're coming in to understand through both of these vocabularies with PTSS and anti-Blackness is that Blackness itself is a very particular kind of structural invention, and it's about existence, right? Your position and your status of existence, and that's serious. Not all languages and frameworks can go there. And so anti-Blackness is one that we'll see comes from believing that there is a uniqueness in Black positionality, that it is without analogy, and you need a language and a way of analyzing the everyday, ordinary conditions to actually address and solve the issues that are present there. So one expression of these kinds of problems that's considering the structural process that's invented Blackness, and it's shaping how it is we think about ourselves, how we experience the world, and really to talk about the interior world is not just how is it that you can analyze something, but it's about your, what they call a libidinal economy, right? How you desire, how you think about success, what you're attracted to, what are your fantasies, your phobias, how do we joke about these things? How do we experience them in our romantic and intimate partnerships? How do we locate them in our friendships and our aspirations? How has this been taught to us? How is it passed down? And so this term PTSS comes from the person depicted here, which is Dr. Joy Degree, has coined this and has a larger body of work explaining it, but it's a way of giving language to the etiology or the study of origins and causes to the range of survival behaviors in Black communities throughout the US, but also throughout the Black diaspora, right? And part of what they're explaining is that it can show up in this acronym called M.A.P. I would say it's much more porous and extensive, but a kind of anchor that we can work with is M.A.P. So multi-generational trauma, right? Across generations, great-grandparents, aunties, cousins, sisters, brothers, parents, you, what may come after you, right? With continued oppression. So this is one axis that contributes to this syndrome or this expression. The next is the absence of opportunities to heal or the absence of access to benefits in the society, right? So everyday living, civil society is antagonistically structured to Black life. Participating in it, trying to work on its terms with policy, with law, with jokes, human rights, doesn't work, right? Those definitions are constructed by knowing what it can never be, what can never be included in this experience, which is Blackness, right? And it's included only to tell you what the limits of that thing is. And that's something that we can unpack later, right? And these combined, again, these are broad, the multi-generational trauma, the absence of opportunities to heal or access benefits in the society lead to PTSS, right? And what do we do to survive? By any means necessary, right? Because the elements of life have been weaponized such that your participation serves only to be harvested, exploited, fetishized, or experience early death by preventable means, right? And so some of the consequences, expressions, our behaviors from that point have a particular relationship that can be considered predictable, not in that I know that you're going to do this, but these stressors are likely to cause these kinds of actions, including what's called vacant self-esteem. And the way that Dr. Degree explains this is a general feeling of hopelessness, depression, and self-destructive outlooks. There is a quote from her book, marked propensity for anger and violence as well. And this can show up as extreme paranoia or feelings of suspicion of others, violence against self, against property, and the members of someone's group, including, families, relatives, acquaintances. We can see this with a lot of intimate partner violence and domestic violence, sexual assault, among other kinds of, abuses and manipulations as well. And the consequences of internalized racism, right? So learned helplessness, literacy deprivation, a distorted self-concept, and a general aversion to, members of your own group, right? So self-hate. The mores or customs, expressions, comportment, right? How you dress, how you talk, that's associated with your heritage, and the physical characteristics. So you can see this in colorism or featureism, or even the way that certain skin tones and body types get fetishized or harassed, joked about, are or deployed even as scapegoats, right? We can see this with fat phobia, colorism, featureism. What do I mean by that? Are they thick? Are they not? Are they yellow bone, red bones? Are they from a different country? Oh, they're exotic, right? So we have all these kinds of casual ways of internalizing and then recycling these kinds of principles. And so PTSS explains an expression of this larger structural process that we're using here through the vocabulary of anti-Blackness to explain, right? There's a larger guide that they have. Of course, this goes much deeper. I'm sure what I'm saying right now might be raising up some questions, or I don't know. That's the kind of attitude I'm getting here. But I'm gonna pause actually before I go into explaining more about anti-Blackness itself and ask, what's coming up for you when I'm saying or giving you this language? Is it a surprise? Do you have questions? Do you agree? Do you see anything missing? Just pausing here.
One thing that came up for me is our currency. I was watching a podcast about like the Black community being a bank and giving loans to people with bad credit. So I think ownership over the narrative, because and we know when things taste, that's not us, and we can see it. That's clear. Even though however much we feed into it, however much we perpetuate whatever, I think there's something like inherently in us that keeps us on the same page. I think that deserves credence.
I think the ownership over the narrative, there's actually quite a bit, not actually, but there's quite a bit in there to come back to around how, in my opinion, the way that perception is structured, right? That's a lot of what we're dealing with here. How do you reject a position everyone agrees that you hold? Right? No amount of burning buildings, no amount of taking people out of prisons or helping them escape is going to change the fact that people are in agreement, in solidarity with what anti-Blackness is and requires. Right? That's an internal thing. So when we think about addressing these issues, it's not just let's get people's basic needs met. Obviously, we need that because you can't change minds if they're hungry. And if we take out all these oppressive buildings, do away with all the military apparatus, their weaponry, in terms of the physical, right? The guns, the bombs, the toxins that can be put into soil, right? If you still believe this set of principles, you're gonna make it again. It's like additions of a car, right? You see, anybody know like the Toyota RAV4s, like from the 90s? Or we could go with a Jeep. I don't know, pick any car from the 90s, right? And let's say it's a Toyota RAV4 and it was super boxy and old and it was like the classic college car. But over time, they remake it as new models, but it's still a Toyota and it's still a RAV4, right? So at its core, it's the same thing. It might be packaged differently. It might run a little bit smoother. You might like it a little bit more, or you might miss it, but it's the same thing, right? So if we are so fixated on the material and the physical, it leaves us with the same internal structure. It's like polishing a shell, but the inside is nasty. You know what I mean? You gotta deal with both. So the narrative is part of it, but then there's a question of ownership, right? Because property is also a problem for Black people, and we can get into that too. But yeah, let's keep pausing here. Is there anything else that's coming up for folks? Any questions or reactions related to PTSS? Not seeing anything in the chat.
I will say that reading PTSS was pivotal for me, specifically as Dr. Degree went into the difference in how black men behave in America versus how black men behave in Africa. You know, the sense of trust that you have in community. I think that for me, recognizing how far we've come from how we are naturally is a great lighthouse as we try to navigate kind of the trauma of oppression.
What for you is like, is there any specific points or in a general way? Because I mean, Africa is a huge continent, so I'm curious if there are particular moments that struck you.
So when she described looking at a child, a small young child, and one of the fathers who was actually caring for the child, holding the child, noticed that she was looking at him. This gentleman walks over to her, never have met her before, but knowing that she was introduced to the village through somebody from the village, placed the child in his lap, or placed the child in her lap, walked off back to the conversation, and by the time Dr. DeGruy looked up to see where he was gone. He had completely moved on and allowed her to take care of his child. Now, again, as we look at the contrast of where we are with trust, with each other, with our community, and we look at that as a basis for where we should be, or kind of a measure to where we were before all of the conditioning that we're trying to clean up, I think that that identification of not only culture, but also the trust within that culture, that you're not going to bring somebody to this area that's harmful to me. I can trust that in you. And because of that, I can trust you with my child. Having that as a goal for me is something that is one of the specific takeaways that I got from the book.
I mean, that's big. I think intra-community trust and not having that has ruptured us in a lot of ways. Granted, it's not unique, but I think what has caused it is unique. And I'd be interested in figuring out how we each develop tools to build trust in those ways that are necessary. Because there's also a lot of this same issues that we experience here happening on the continent as well, right? Like, gender-based violence is rampant pretty much everywhere. And sexual terror defines a lot of the experiences, particularly for Black children throughout the diaspora. So in some ways, they have models that we can learn from. In other ways, we share these issues too, right? So maybe that's something we can come back to. How do we start from where we are to build trust within our communities?
Brother Q said observation and participation. Once folks see it in practice, they're more inclined to participate. And I think that's one of the simpler truths about it.
Observation and participation. Okay. Yeah, let's keep that in mind and come back to it too. For the sake of time though, I am gonna keep moving to the next part. Okay. Let's see. Okay. So in this portion, I'm gonna move into some of the material and reading. These are a bit more conceptual kinds of articles that are also grounded in experience, but their intent is to give language to feelings, experiences, and structural conditions that have to date been missing. So the first is coming from João Vargas. It's a theory about anti-Blackness, partially shaping growing Afro-pessimist frameworks. While the book is pictured, I'm talking more broadly about anti-Blackness, though if you want to talk about Afro-pessimism, I'm also open to that too. So I have some points here, and then I'll have a table to share. But this framework has been developed particularly by centering Black women's experiences and Black children's experiences under slavery, and that the quintessential slave, and to quote Hortense Spillers here, is a Black woman. And this framework is emphasizing that anti-Blackness and racism against people of color is not the same thing. And so it's a worldview and ideology and language that is explaining the way that we have conceptualized how we are human is against Blackness, right? So we have the position of the slave as defining the limit case of what is human, how that's experienced, how day-to-day life is structured, how generations are shaped, how resources are shared. And so in a broader sense, in a historically grounded sense, this understanding exists before colonization. This belief system exists before colonization. But chattel slavery systematizes this template to be a global order. And that is significant, right? So it's not that it began in colonization, but colonization systematized this structure. And so we're going to learn more about what this structure actually is. I'll come back to this actually. So to give an analogy, I have a clip from The Matrix, and then I'll connect this to the table. I hope this plays. If it doesn't play, I will share it with you in a different way. Okay. I froze. Okay. Sorry about that. Let me share it here. And okay. Can you all see this?
It's still coming up. I'll let you know when we can see it. Yes.
You want to know what it is. The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. What truth? That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind. Unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. This is your last chance. After this, there is no turning back. You take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Remember, all I'm offering is the truth, nothing more.
Okay, so this is the allegory I'd like to use, and it's also the one centered in the article. I'm going to switch back to the slides and share a table to illustrate, oh, I froze, sorry, to illustrate conceptually and politically how racism and anti-Blackness differs. Give me a minute here, and I will get this back to you.
We can see.
Okay, I'm gonna, oh, let me resume that. Okay, awesome. Okay, so this table is coming from João Costa Vargas, who is a professor of anthropology at the UC Riverside, but has predominantly been doing work with Black former Black Panther Party in LA through the Kappa group, the Coalition Against Police Abuse in LA, and has also been working with collectives in Rio de Janeiro, Criolla and Reajo Serra Morta against police brutality and the death of Black children from police violence and gender-based violence. This article is quite long, but I'm going to use this table as an anchoring and just invite you all to read this. I can share it in the chat or again, personally, if you're interested in what this table brings up. Broadly, as we saw with the allegory here, to see this is a choice and it's about perception, right? And so we have the blue pill and the red pill. Similar to the video, it's saying that the blue pill is a story that you're given, right? It's your day-to-day, how you think you're moving through life. The red pill is the thing that makes the blue pill make sense and requisite as a kind of veil, a kind of illusion, right? And so we get taught the value system of anti-Blackness through the language of racism. But politically, and understanding what is this thing we're in? What is it about? What am I trying to change? Will change depending on what you center, right? So if you center the story that you're given, the hierarchy is white people and then everybody else, non-white people, people of color, right? This is where you get BIPOC frameworks, Black, Indigenous, and people of color just get lumped into one. White people are the pinnacle, right? Anti-Blackness, right, or the actual framework, the matrix of which racism is being played out or superimposed as like, this is all that it is, right? We just need to rearrange this thing. We just need to take these Lego blocks and make a different system, right? It's saying, you don't even know what the root of this is. You're playing on the surface, right? And so anti-Blackness, like PTSS, is like, what is the cause of this expression of oppression as racism? What's the root of it? Anti-Blackness, right? It's the language. Antagonistic to Blackness, or having Blackness as an antagonized protagonist. A little play there. Anyway, in this centering, we're centering Blackness. We're saying this position has never happened before, and it's foundational to how the world works, right? Even the category of brown people is not so much about its proximity to whiteness as it is about its distance from Blackness, right? And so in this framing of how is the world being structured, we are saying let's start with Black folks. And Black folks everywhere, as we already stated, Blackness isn't a monolith. So the way that we're centering that is considering this fluctuating spectrum. And then it's non-Black folks, right? What that's saying is we are not considered human. So you can't just lump us as BIPOC. It's not the same thing. No other world order has systematized your understand what human is. And so in the framework of anti-Blackness, it's Black versus non-Black. That's how we're looking at things. Then we come down, so I've just explained the first 3 rows. I'm on row 4 right now. In terms of how political actions are then mobilized from this analysis, it's different in blue pill, red pill. World of racism, the story it is, right? We are thinking that, looking at row 5 too here, the way that we're oppressed is unique to our group, but it's related, right? We just have to advocate for the same things, equal or equitable, and we'll be good, right? What does that mean? Equal versus equity, if we're having some difficulty understanding that. Let me get a visual here. You might have seen this. Oh, that's not good. Let's say you have a winner's block, right? And there's, okay, let's see, okay, I messed that up. Okay, let's say you have like Olympic stands, athletes on a block. say you have something like this, right? You got a winner's block. It might be like first place, second place, fourth place, third place, right? It's equal. I'm gonna give you 10,000. I'm gonna give you 10,000. I'm gonna give you 10,000, right? So let's say I just do that. You get 10K. You get a t-shirt. You get a t-shirt. You get a t-shirt, right? So in this example, right, everybody's starting at different positions, but we're gonna be equal, right? We're all oppressed, so we should all get the same amount of stuff. White person's gonna get 10K, Asian person's gonna get 10K, indigenous person's gonna get 10K, black person's gonna get 10K, right? Why are you complaining? You all got the same stuff. That's equal, right? We're arguing that treatment should be equal. Then you have equity, right? I'm gonna use a different color for that. Equity says, all right, this is how white people experience all the benefits of this, right? They're all the way up here. But black folks, we started here. You can't bootstrap that. Imagine that visual. You gotta take your own stuff and go in the same circle to bootstrap. Doesn't work. So equity says, I'm gonna add 90K, and then this person's gonna get 40. Another person's gonna get 30, right? Now, this is equity. Black folks got 90 to come up to the same because if we're centering white folks, like the blue pill, right, and we're arguing for equity, like a DEI framework, black folks get an amount that gives them the same baseline as this. Let's say this is indigenous folks, I'll use an I, and Asian folks, I'll use an A. That's not everybody, but for the sake of this example, right? Then they got 30 to come up to this baseline, and this group got 40 to come up to this baseline, right? That's equity. But you still have the demarcations, right? This is white, this is indigenous, this is black, this is another group. Anti-blackness says, we are the center that makes all of these categorizations and demarcations necessary. You all still know that you're human because you're not black folks. You didn't need this 90K. You don't need to defend the fact that you're in this category in the same way, right? You're not gonna be killed because you're in that category. Sorry, I'll bring it back, right? Anti-blackness is saying all of these demarcations are harmful, and at some point we're gonna have to redo this same process because the system hasn't changed. Everything's still getting more expensive. We're still trying to have our family. We're still trying to insist that we're in these positions, right? And black folks are saying this world order will always be harmful for us, and you will always have that distance from blackness so that you know you're experiencing a particular quality of life that you're invested in. So we're trying to do away with the whole thing, right? We're trying to rip all of that down. But again, that's not only about the distance between schools or the fact that, you know, we're not seen in our textbooks or we don't have elected officials that look like us, right? It's saying the only form of, if you want to call it a reparation or justice, those are equally problematic, is a completely different world. And if we're about to be serious about that, we can't begin from centering white folks because it just does not center the way that we are oppressed, which is interlocking. It's unique, right? So moving to row 5, centering racism, centering white folks says we experience specific but related forms of oppression. All racialized groups do. Anti-blackness says your forms of oppression might be specific and related, but there is no other position like blackness, and we need to be serious about that if we're gonna mobilize, right? What we need is an awareness of these kinds of psychic immaterial investments. And that can't happen unless you're centering black folks. And so politically, multiracial alliances are an option, right? It's possible. It's not required for us to act with awareness of our things. If you're centering racism, BIPOC, whiteness, right? You have to be in solidarity with non-Black folks, right? You need the spectrum, you need the rainbow. And anti-Blackness says, well, I don't know about that. I don't know if we need that, right? And then moving forward, we're looking at rows 6 and 7, the last 2 rows now. It's saying, in terms of what we envision of freedom and progress, again, depending on what we center, different things are our trajectory. That's the vision that we're holding, right? If we're in the blue pill framework, the empire state, democracy are redeemable. We just need people that look like us. We just need people to listen to the rules, right? We just need more policies, right? We can fix this, right? Anti-Blackness, when you're centering that, is saying, if this is still here, if Black folks are still the bedrock for how we make sense of everything, the world order is not redeemable. It's gotta go, right? The entire way we understand being human, the way that we have structured our society is fundamentally antagonistic and anti-Black, which has all of these consequences for the earth and Black people everywhere. And the difficulty is that repeated, and now we might even be surprised to say expected set of experiences gives life to other people. Like, that's the air they breathe. That's how they move through the world every day. And they don't think about it. Or maybe they do. I shouldn't generalize. But in both, the solutions, one can be reform and radical transformation, and the other is total kind of abolition, which is not just physical, but deeply, deeply involved in terms of your value schema, right? And we can make that more specific in another conversation. I'm just giving a general introduction to the differences between these frameworks. Gonna pause here. Imagine things might be coming up, and I think I saw some stuff in the chat. So questions, comments, reactions to this.
I say you're hitting on some very powerful points. And again, like how we started off, this is making us realize just how intense our work. And it goes as far as to recognizing the difference between us being on a defensive as opposed to being on the offensive. And it actually sounds like those kind of measures have to come up.
Yeah, I think because too, the way this is structured is as an ecology, meaning it's across the elements of life, right? So what it means to be proactive and attending to this is going to look dynamic and different, right? The way that we're tending to our mental health and our partnerships, the way that we build homes, the way that we solve, having infestations, you're considering a completely different set of relationships, right? And I have exercises perhaps for another conversation that can help make that a little bit more specific. But I also want to emphasize, like, being proactive and militant and on the front lines is as much about defending against police brutality and defending people as it is about your capacity for vulnerability and intimacy and connection, right? All of those things have been assaulted. Elements of life, right? So playing with that is complex, but it also will embrace our differences and our strengths and perspectives because we need all of it, right? There's an infinite amount of work to do, but we're doing it. I think I saw some in the chat that I want to read, but I'm listening in case others also would like to speak. Oh, bingo. Oh, thank you. Trying. I hope I'm making sense too. If I'm, like flying away and going over people's heads, do pause.
You're doing great. I want to go back to the last slide here, or the last.
Okay.
Bottom part.
The Matrix one, or?
No, same page. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
Bottom row here.
Mm-hmm.
Solution being reform, radical transformation. And then on the other side is abolition. Can you elaborate a little bit on that part? Not to get too much into anything. But...
Sure. I think each of these vocabularies, racism and anti-Blackness, are trying to explain an expression of a problem, right? What's the problem with our world today? And the last row is saying the way that we attend to that problem, racism as the priority, and if we're gonna personify it, racism thinks we just need to change what we've been given, what we were born into, right? Change meaning let's add some policies. Let's make sure that the people in charge look like us. Let's make sure people listen to our laws, right? Radical transformation could be a kind of socialist project where we don't just have libraries, but we have community kitchens. And we have made sure that people don't just have to go to one major hospital to get care, but they have other kinds of community clinics that are equipped, for example, to attend to people's medical and healthcare needs more frequently. So it's on every block, right? It's easy, it's accessible, maybe it's free, right? Nobody has to drive. We all have walkable cities, right? And so we've radically changed how resources are shared, how things are structured, right? But at the baseline, you're still Black. And that still has a particular meaning in this world, right? You can still be subjected to violence. People can still go to jail. Jails might still be there. Jails might not be there. I don't know. Maybe they have a different form of detention, right? So same kind of like, if you ever saw like snowflakes being cut out when you were a kid, and like you cut a piece of paper and it makes a snowflake, and then you pull it out and it's a bunch of like a ring of snowflakes. I'm saying that because if you look really closely, some might be chipped, some might be torn, but they're generally cut in the same way. And when you take a step back, it's like, oh, these are all snowflakes. It might look a little different when you get up close, right? The prison might not look like a prison. Maybe it looks like a great set of apartments like it does in Sweden or something. But it's a prison, right? At the end of the day, it's a prison. They just packaged it up so it looks real nice and cute. And you're like, yeah, you should go in there because you did something bad, right? That's racism. Anti-Blackness is saying, our world order, we need to reestablish our relationships of doing everything. It all has to go. It is a destruction and creation of values and structures. So it's not just, let's take away the prisons, but let's also find a way to contend with violence, because maybe that can't be completely eradicated ever, right? And we need to radically become a completely different kind of life. You need completely different kinds of value systems. We can make that more specific, right? How is it you understand connection? How is it that you understand and treat and relate to the body, right? This value system also has implications for political mobilization depending on the frameworks. I'll give an example. I'll use a cliche even, right? Obama, right? And I know a bunch just came up with that. Obama is saying, radical transformation. We got our first Black president. We got our first Black family in the White House. This is, what do they say? Our ancestors' wildest dreams, right? I doubt that. But that's the narrative that gets recycled, right? That's the investment that gets passed on through children's stories and jokes at the cookout, right? It's happening in all these really subtle ways, but it's repeated. Right? And then we can come back to Dr. Degrees. It's like, oh, I don't fucks with that at all, excuse my language, because I'm like, at the end of the day, the war machine continues. You changed nothing. And abolition says, you don't even realize that it's a travesty, right? What do I mean by that? You can be President Obama, but you're not presidential because you still Black man, right? I'm not gonna speak badly about it, but like, you just kept it going. You know what I mean? So those are some examples that I could give. There are multiplicity, but some anchors. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's wild, because it's verbatim like a conversation I had like last week at my family reunion. I was talking to my little cousin, and she's like, "You still doing the Black Panther thing?" I'm like, "Yeah." But like, you know what was really, really radical? he was like, we had Obama, right? Like I'm talking textbook, like this conversation. If you brought it up, so it's interesting that you went with that example right there.
Yeah, and I mean, another example that would kind of pull it out of time, but I mean that's okay. Time is a whole thing, and we'll get into that with the next reading. But it's like the racism side is like Obama, like oh no, Kamala didn't win, and then anti-blackness is like, did we forget about the Haitian Revolution? The contrast, right? What is revolutionary, which is part of the question that we're getting to here. It's not just militant action, it's about what you believe, it's about your heart and your mind and your relationship to death, violence, and life. But we'll get into it, you know?
I have to cut you off, but I think that's an important distinction, and I think that's one, I don't think, that's why I asked the question, because the abolition, the term abolition is at an all-time high, right? It's a good time for the word abolition. It's a starting five right now. And I've been in a lot of reformist circles, and the rhetoric is like, the mission is the same. We just all want abolition, right? But the means is like strictly reformist. And I think it's important, if you're being intentional about freedom for our people, you have to draw these distinct lines in the sand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's true. And part of what I try, even in my own practice, right? We're all full of our own contradictions, and we're all steeped in anti-Black conditioning. So like, none of us is perfect. I'm not even gonna pretend like I am. But I am saying, with like the snowflake example and the car example, being able to think in principle helps you get to the root. And you could even think about it with like friendships or people that you've met, and it's like, ooh, I don't mess with you, or like, oh, we're best friends. And then maybe that relationship ends, and then you meet somebody else, completely different person, but the same things are happening, the same patterns, the same habits, right? Just packaged differently. Thinking in principle helps you recognize it wherever it's happening. And then when you have tools to address that principle or that root cause, I think that's where change is really gonna be able to be integrated. And some of that is improvisational too. Some of that is not completely planned, but to me, those are important yet subtle differences between centering racism and centering anti-Blackness, right? And there's a whole onslaught of things that happen when you do either one that we also have to figure out how to contend with, right? Because like you said, certain things like abolition get to be buzzwords, right? So then it's like, oh, are we attached to just being called revolutionary, or do you actually want to be revolutionary? You know what I mean? You want to be president, but you can't be presidential, right? You can't have that quality. Anyway.
Resistance is one of them too. Everything is resistance these days besides resistance.
So
true. When the Trader Joe's is resistance, like nah, resistance is resistance, bro. But that's something else.
But you're seeing it, right? And like the video at the Matrix 2, one question for us is, how are we going to be in relationship with people's unconscious, right? What do I mean by that? People are going to see things, you could tell them the truth, but they might go back to sleep, right? They might choose that blue pill. They say like, I hear you, but I don't want to be uncomfortable, or I'm afraid, so I'm going to do that. Or some will say, I'm afraid, and let's figure out how we're going to do this alongside one another. And so we need tools for all of that. People have to choose this and this kind of awareness. And not everybody will. And those are things that are part of this conversation too.
Right on. Back to the observation and participation thing. I think that's why a big part of the reason people cling to the Panther is because you've seen it in action in a very serious and impactful way. And without doing the knowledge, people remove the context a lot, and the anti-war movement or the things that allowed it to be what it was. But back to the context I was saying earlier, I think you're cooking right now, sis. So I'm gonna let you continue.
I want to credit though, João Vargas is the one who wrote this table, wrote this article. I'm glad I can share the information, but really tap back in with their work as well. I saw some, thank you though. I don't want to dismiss it. Thank you. I'm trying my best. See some messages in the chat, so I just want to pause on this before I move on. Oh, thanks. Thank you, thank you. Yeah. Okay. Great things to come back to. I'm gonna move to my last set of material here, which is just a short reading, so feel welcome to get a drink, listen. If you don't have the material, I'd actually like to share it on the screen if you're someone who needs to see the words while somebody is reading it to you, but this is gonna be a, let's say, political ed story time. And after this point, we can open up for a group discussion if you all are comfortable with that. So let me come out of this. I'm gonna share the reading on my screen. Okay. And I'll be reading and scrolling so that you can also see. Okay, so this reading for me is an extension and a combination of the analytic of anti-Blackness and the implications of PTSS. And I want to offer it as a way to think about, in the long term, across these generations, both as a gap or those that we may have with us and forthcoming, where do we want to go? Right. Can folks see this screen, this article here?
See it.
Okay, so this is by Calvin Warren, Black queer theorist based in Atlanta right now, and a huge writer on ontological terror and anti-Blackness, as well as Black nihilism more particularly, and the way that anti-Blackness, in my understanding, is an expression of spiritual warfare and constitutes the death of being and spirit. And in their larger bodies of work, they talk about spirit, faith, and the kinds of resources that are necessary to go through this, but also what I appreciate about their work is their ability to contend with the ways different kinds of narratives have been weaponized, in this article particularly with democracy and time and imagination. So I will be reading from here and keep scrolling so that you can read along if you have started already. If you're going to be walking around, that's fine. If I'm going too quickly, please let me know and I'll slow down. Okay. Abandoning Time, Black Nihilism, and the Democratic Imagination. Does time heal all wounds? Or does time require certain wounds to sustain itself? Is the curative function of time an onto-metaphysical fantasy when concealing the internecine operations of temporal subjugation? What happens to existence or life itself once we abandon time, its unquestioned positivity, and its presumed givenness as a gift, an indispensable resource, or an a priori condition? Furthermore, is the activity of imagining even possible without recourse to time, temporality, or its durative schemas? Is the imagination a temporal captive, and does abandoning, or dare I say abolishing, time liberate the imagination to perform different tasks and pursuits? Questioning time is a difficult task, since thinking requires it to reorient beyond Newtonian or postmodern or neoliberal time and eschatology. Questioning, as meta-commentary, would require an exceptional position, both within and without time simultaneously, a position capable of investigating the very thing that enables investigation, holding time in abeyance. But the seeming impossibility of this enterprise would require a different noetic apparatus, since thought as questioning depends on time as its oxygen. The imagination then offers the promise of liberation from temporal tyranny and enterprise contravening the conditions of reason, knowledge, forms, and indeed the possible itself. The potential transgression, to use a hackneyed term in American studies, of the imagination is diminished, however, when it is bound to democracy. Democracy tethers the imagination to time, since democracy is an elaborate schematization, instrumentalization, and defense of time. During any moment of political and social crisis, we are importuned to reimagining democracy as imagining the future. To consider democracy futureless, or that time has run out, or that futurity and progress is its devastating temporal myth, is to open oneself up to charges of theoretical heresy, despair, hopelessness, and any other abject calumny. In times of crisis, when the authoritarian kernel of democracy is exposed, theorists call on time to hold inconsistencies, resolve contradictions, blackmail hope, and repair brokenness. Once again, we land in the terrain that time heals all wounds, political or otherwise. Samuel A. Chambers defines the imagination as a synthetic power of creation and recreation, an ability to combine the uncombinable, to surpass binaries without merely collapsing them, to fashion something new. And from such synthesis, we are told that a democratic imagination is possible, since we would, quote, think the limits and their transgression of democratic theory and democracy as well. Here we see that the democratic imagination recasts limits as possibilities rather than complete failures. Limits become the resource for creation and recreation rather than evidence of destruction and uselessness. A couture Kantianism or Hegelianism mixed with a splash of deconstruction salvages democracy from the perils of its absurdity, devastation, and brutality. Why this investment in democracy's intrinsic creative power? Can this creativity finally bring an end to anti-Black violence and Black suffering? Or is the knowledge of democracy's fabulousness enough to sustain Blacks through police terrorism, environmental racism, re-enslavement through incarceration, and food and housing insecurity and discrimination? I would suggest that what makes such creative synthesis possible is an unacknowledged dependence on time. For proponents of democracy, it is time that is malleable for creative enterprises of reimagination or progress, fetishization, and an ontology of change that need not justify or prove itself. Declaration of change seems to be enough. What if, however, democracy is clinging to a depleted resource? What if time is no longer enough to orient existence, especially for those inhabitants of an abyss within which time, space, ethics, and law are weaponized against existence? Put somewhat differently, democracy has exhausted the imagination. It is a speculative vampire that drains the imagination of any vital resource for its own survival. This speculation is an outrageous expenditure of energy, an enjoyment without end, a scholarly surplus pleasure requiring an incessant and useless political repetition. Citing Johnston. I would describe this speculation as the conjoining of time, democracy, and the imagination as an interminable quest or a certain stuckness in a scene of failure, a constant encircling of political and legal vacuity. This repetition is most dramatically demonstrated for me in Black political participation in voting, protesting, keeping hope alive, returning to the kernel of authoritarian violence, i.e. anti-Blackness, with unbridled hope, temporal determination, and an investment in the ontology of change, citing himself and Farid. Time mocks Blacks, requiring the historical deja vu to be reimagined, redeemed, rethought, or ignored, rather than accepting time as anti-Black unity and democracy as the permeance of anti-Blackness. Chants of yes we can, our vote matters, we have power, we're moving forward, etc., serve to neglect the failure of Black political participation and to imprison the imagination within futurity. As I am writing these remarks, I am witnessing the absurdity of this democratic imagination and its unrelenting time. On one news program, I hear that police shot unarmed Andre Hill, a 47-year-old Black resident of Columbus, Ohio, without cause, and rather than offering him medical assistance, decided to handcuff him, just in case the supine dying man finds a gun magically, I guess. On the other news program, I hear Black politicians importuning, begging, and guilting Blacks into voting for change. Black political pundits assure voters that the ontology of change is realizable if you just exercise your right to vote. Never again. We will transform police practices. This time will be different. Did Blacks not vote when police shot 12-year-old Tamir Rice as he was playing with his toy gun on the playground? By the way, no federal charges will be brought against the police officers who shot him. Did Blacks not vote when Sandra Bland lost her life in police custody? Did Blacks not vote after police deprived Eric Garner and George Floyd and apparently 70 other people of breath? In answer to my inquiry, why should we continue to vote if anti-Black violence is not changing? I am told, just keep believing. We can vote people in that can change things. When I then ask, but I voted for President Obama, suspending my nihilism in an intoxication of hope affect. I thought things were going to change for Blacks. I feel just as unsafe and endangered post-Obama as pre-Obama. I am told, Obama wasn't a magic Negro. He did the best he could. Then I ask, so why vote if it will take an act of magic to address the existential threat of anti-Blackness? Time mocks the cyclical movement of such inquiries. They are indeed unanswerable within the creative, synthetic, and powerful democratic horizon. Voting becomes the premier instrument of the democratic imagination. Supposedly, it activates the imagination with futurity, avoids paralysis with action, and can be repeated. What type of creativity will finally eradicate anti-Black brutality? And could such creativity even operate within time? Could we still call such creativity democracy? Must we abandon time to enable the imagination to perform the mystical, the magical, and the ineffable? If we have understood nihilism as the entrapment and misery of metaphysics, the reduction of being to value circulation or axial ontology, and being's forgottenness with the neutralization of various hierarchies of existence and legitimacy, then Black nihilism would suggest that time is not a natural or intrinsic resource. Time is a supreme onto-metaphysical value that traffics in anti-Black violence, subjugation, destruction, and must be also reduced to myth, fantasy, and displaced. Rather than providing the resource for creativity and power, time is a racial privilege that embeds itself in being and metaphysics. It anchors the human and engenders extreme brutality and destructive pleasure. It is impossible then to de-link time from the anti-Black violence saturating it. Enterprises such as Black politics and democratic imagination reproduce the same rather than introducing a break in violence. Put differently, the democratic imagination takes time for granted as a natural right or unquestioned condition of existence, rather than bringing this condition under investigation and suspicion. Reproducing time as a creative and synthetic activity is its primary occupation. Black existence exposes time as an unreliable lore, one vested in certain onto-metaphysical fantasies. I would add to Placenti's remarkable anatomizing of nihilism, which is theoretical, moral, theological, technological, judicial, and spatio-temporal, since both space and time provide problems for Black thinking in the abyss and demand a protocol of thinking or imagination that is released from the preconditions of being and ethics. Black nihilism de-idealizes both space and time as offering anything intrinsically or potentially transformative. Almost done here. Thus, the limit of space and time for Black existence cannot be reworked into anything life-affirming or synthesized into anything meaningful. To put a finer point on this reflection, anti-Blackness is a problem of time and the democratic imagination. Police shootings and COVID-19 deaths, for example, foreground the failure of time to alleviate Black suffering. Time is not curative. It is a weapon of tremendous violence. Despite the optimism of Black political theorists, time entraps Black thinking in a web of contradictions, absurdities, and impasses. The pathetic theorizing of Melvin Rogers, for example, in his Between Pain and Despair, What Ta-Nehisi Coates is Missing, presents an incredibly impoverished, unreliable, and inept reading of Black pessimism and the crisis of Black existence. It links democratic action to the imagination and clings to an ontology of change, despite all evidence to the contrary in Black life. His work, however, represents a coterie of Black political optimists so blinded by democracy's promise that they consider Black pain a form of political possibility. It is a perverse enterprise capitalizing on what we might call Black jouissance. Futurity constitutes the temporal material for surplus pleasure in Black suffering, political failure, and travail. Getting to the conclusion now. If there is any hope for the imagination and its endless circulation in contemporary Black thought, it will need to abandon time and refuse its seductions. The future is but one temporal value we must de-idealize and insert an anti-Black will to power, one wreaking havoc across the globe. In these desperate times, Black existence needs a liberated imagination, an imagination liberated from formal thought, the world, destructive transcendence and immanence, and dogmatic preconditions. So why continue to expend energy reimagining the future and democracy? Let us focus on Black imagining, on enterprises that sustain us in the abyss. Outlining and presenting such enterprises requires tremendous spiritual and intellectual energy, but such investment is all we have. Okay, so that's Warren's piece and my last offering of new material for our conversation. And in our last, 25 minutes or so, I'd like to invite us to just revisit some of the earlier questions and share what's come up for you. What questions do you have? Reactions, things that stick out to you. I'll be listening. Collective space. I see a lot in the chat. I didn't get to read it yet. Okay. Emails for the folks. So just rereading the chat, but pause me if you want to speak. If I'm understanding correctly, it's not enough to see Black places in high faces. In high places, we need a fundamental overturn of these systems that center Black folks from the get-go. Yes. For me, what's helpful, even with this piece, some of the language, I'll link it in a second. In centering principles, right? How is it that things are reorganized and structured? There's a value schema that is overly binary and material, right? Can I measure this? Can I repeat it? Can I categorize it? Can I tell you if it's good or bad, if it's a success or it's failure, if it's right or if it's wrong? I'm not saying there's not right and wrong, but what I am saying with this is that rather than just seeing, the way we get to understanding or agreeing this is what's needed can partially come through a reframing of success and failure, right? So it's not just we need this because I said, yes, we need a fundamental overturn of these things. Look at what this thing made possible. Look at what putting Obama as president made possible. what did it do? What did it not do? Do we want that again, right? So it's not just, let me defer to you because you're the prof or something. Like, we have access to that information, and that's the awareness and subtlety we have to train too. But yeah, just bringing things together. I'm happy to share all of the material with you all afterwards, but we have about 20 minutes or so. I know folks might be tired, but what came up for you? Reactions, questions, comments, processing maybe? I don't know.
How you doing, Sister Brianna? Nice to see you again. This is Popeye.
Hello. Hi.
I just wanna to say that I really appreciate you coming on and giving us this powerful lesson. I really appreciate it, and I think everyone else also appreciate it. I do have a question. What is, from your perspective, because with you being a professor, what is your opinion when it comes to the students that you teach? How are they taking this information?
It's varied. I have gotten to teach in medical schools. I do medical ed curriculum development. I've also taught in other community spaces, and I've taught where I am now at community colleges and high schools. And it's really quite a wide spectrum. I think because I teach skills that encourage reflection and that inner development, I've had more students that come into agreement and acceptance of this framework than I have had people rebel against it. But I've also had folks rebel against it. A lot of the students that I've taught are first generation or working class. I've also taught folks who are, not Black and also come into agreement but are deeply disturbed. And then they have this onslaught of, what do I do? And they want instructions. And I think it's a challenge because I think when you center Black folks, you get questions like, what about this, or what about that, or what about everybody else? And like, can we just talk about Black folks? So I get that, but I also have a lot of like, I can't believe nobody told me, just shock, like I can't believe nobody explained this to me before. I've also had people get really angry with me. I had a student call me, address me as Breonna Taylor twice, which was jarring, the thing is, like, as I'm teaching about this, I'm in the problem itself. Like, I experience the power dynamics between students. I experience the gender violence. I'm not out of it, but I do think that the classrooms have been a space where I get to share it in a truthful and sustained way. So I appreciate it. It's challenging, but I experienced students also appreciating more language and perspective and tools for it. Yeah.
That's good. That sounds like more and more people outside the revolutionary space is being receptive to this information, which is great, because then that means maybe they'll be more interested in actually learning more and actually doing what they need to do to help improve and to help change the system, basically. So that's great.
Got a question here. Because of the fact that what we're dealing with is an active, consistent, drawn out process of dumbing down the population, what do you see as a way to try to get people to see the fact that a lot of the work that has to be done, especially in terms of self-reflection, is geared toward redeveloping the self to the point to where you can actually engage in the fight? And I say it from the standpoint that one of the things we say within the Black Panther Party movement is we talk about people's willingness, abilities, and then readiness to actually engage. And like based on a lot of the information that you're providing, people could come to the table with that willingness, but then they get overwhelmed by just how little they know about themselves, to the point to where they recognize that, like, where do I fit in? How do I jump in? How do I engage in this? Because I didn't realize that I knew so little. It's like when a person comes to find out that I didn't know that I didn't know, when all along they thought they knew something. Now all of a sudden, where are they?
Yeah, I thank you for the questions. I think these are questions like we can all answer. I can share some of what my approach is to each of these things. So this is part of why I emphasize the actions that you see on the streets with protests or physical revolts, occupying spaces, is not everything, right? The reason people are overwhelmed, and it's just a part of learning, right? You come into greater awareness. Part of that is not just I know more, it's also I'm aware of how much I don't know, myself included. There's a ton of stuff I don't know, and there's a ton of stuff I will never know completely, right? So in part of this growth and having these conversations, some of the work that's included is as an educator, and not just educator because I have a label, but like people you walk alongside with in your own life, in the own seasons of your life, right? Each of us need to learn how to be equipped to deal with this, right? Nervous system regulation, having these kinds of skillful conversations, being able to deal with conflict and the fact that some people will grow at different cadences and different rates. Some people will not accept truth. It's not something that can be forced, right? The same with the Matrix video. It's like, I can show you this. You can go there if you want to, or you don't have to. It's up to you. What I mean is, truth doesn't mean a lot to the same thing to everybody. Like, and it's something that I had to deal with, and it's difficult for me too, and it's something that I continually grapple with. I'm like, facts is facts. Like, it's happening right now. You're getting upset because I've made this critique about your occupation or your discipline, and you're taking it personally because you made this thing your identity, and I'm showing you, look, this is just an extension of the problem. It's not all you. We can move past this, but they're still stuck in that moment. And if you have tools to work with that, which I've been developing community centers, a community center and courses, and different kinds of psychosomatic tools to also deal with these things. I teach in a way that's oriented towards application of these abstract things. So the same way that I teach out from like, this is a very concrete, this is how we're experiencing this, to here's a framework, to here's bigger ideas for us to consider and come back to, now what do we do? I do that in my own life in a number of ways, but I kind of want to take a back seat because I've been talking a bunch and y'all have hands and this is your space too.
Yeah, no doubt. And I've been thinking, Brother War, I've been thinking about that when I've been thinking about, like, through the recruitment process and how, you know, the average person receives the information and takes on the mantle of being a Panther, which, you know, is, considering the group, is a lot of dedication. There's a lot that goes into it. And I don't think people recognize that up front, but one thing I've been considering more is how to make the revolutionary space, when it comes into the context of us, like a softer landing. Like, and I think that's something they did really well, even though they were accepting anyone and everyone, which we don't. I do think we have to keep these nuances, you know, on our brain a little bit when it comes to how people are going to receive this information, how people are going to land and be able to receive the community with the truth and grace at the same time.
Yes, Dr. Simmons, it's always good to listen to a colleague. I'm Dr. William X. It's always good to listen to a colleague speak on the pronouncements of way the situation is in the 20th and 21st century. I'm a product of the 20th century, from the 50s to the 60s, which makes my sense relevant as I do grassroots. I've been a Panther for over 60-something years, to the point of 50-something years. But I deal mostly with grassroots and hands-on processing. It could be from the NAN to out to the shopping to the, which is old is new now. We're dealing with protesters and dealing situations with Target, businesses that do not cater to blacks, but they accept our dollars. You go back to the 1960s when we had boycotts. They're relevant now in the 21st century, but it's hard to get Gen Z and Gen X to understand that the laziness of what was accomplished during the 50s and 60s gave our politicians, and you know this for a fact, our politicians who were elected into offices, the process is thinking that the revolutionary spirit had died. They got to the point in the 70s and 80s and 90s and even to the 10s, thinking that they were enigmas to the point that they were not going to be touched, which is not true. When you spoke about Obama, yes, I have to cap by saying Obama was elected into office, but as all political aspects are with him, who have black skin, he was relevant to only could do as much as he could do. And that had press that he was elected twice is relevant to the point where when you see Donald Trump was elected once and he was elected twice again. But the Constitution itself is flawed because the founding fathers of this colonist country put in a process that did not deal with black people. It dealt with individuals who colonized the United States at that time. And over 250-year-old Constitution is not relevant in the 21st century, but still they tried to keep the words and the process going. And if you look at it now, they're trying to change the Constitution around by doing all the things that no one stands up to do. I still keep my shotgun in the back of my car since 1968, and I will always keep it there. I'm not saying I'm violent, and I'm not saying I'm nonviolent, but the whole aspect of California living is that Ronald Reagan took away the right to carry arms in the state of California, and he went to the NRA and told them, say, hey, listen, I need your help. The Black Panthers are up here. They have their guns. Would you please help me draft an amendment stating that you cannot carry firearms within sight or loaded? The NRA did something they had never done something in the first in their lifetime. They agreed with that, and that took away the right to bear arms in the state of California in that time. But my problem is, question I'm going to ask you this, is that do you see democracy as a genocide to black people within this country, which is 47 million of us, to try to do the Marcus Garvey aspect of putting us all back on boats and sending us back to Africa or Sudan or Libya, whereas Latinos are sent to South America, in Venezuela, in Colombia, and saying that trying to make this an all-white, blue-eyed country of America that is molded into an individual who, in authoritarianism, is trying to be a dictator at the same time, but also trying to say that our rights are taken away. But I would have not thought in my time I would have ever seen black women.
Sorry, I don't know if I missed part. I'm trying to. Oh, okay, I did miss some of it.
Yeah, I never would have.
Sorry, did everybody hear the question?
I never would have thought in my lifetime I would have seen black women murdered within. No, it's an old saying. When black men get murdered, that's like common knowledge or collateral damage, or it's natural in this country. But when you take our black women who have been murdered and raped ever since they landed on these shores 400 years ago, but not in the picture of you seeing that Sandra was taken, she was on her way to a job in Texas to work at Prairie View at an $80,000 a year job, but she was given a cell with a plastic bag in her cell, and she hung herself. I can't accept that. I can't accept.
Dr. Jackpot, I'm sorry, brother. Hey, can you real quick? I didn't hear part of that. What was your question for Sister Brianna?
My question is, can you see democracy as a genocide for Black people in this country in the 21st century? I'll cut it off right there.
I know, Anthony, thank you. You've had your hand up for a minute. Would you like to say something before I respond? I know, just want to respect folks' time.
No, please, go ahead. Thank you, Brianna.
Okay, I'll try and answer it succinctly. I understand democracy is a dangerous psychic investment and a system that sustains genocidal conditions. I don't think anti-Blackness can actually be recognized as genocide. It requires a recognition or an acceptance that something is human and has been violated. And the premise of human rights is antagonistic to Black folks. Regarding the point around gender violence, the production of anti-Blackness precedes these shores. And as I was saying earlier, to put a finer point on it, we know that the system that expands as a global order through transatlantic slavery is learned through trans-Saharan trade. And so the production of anti-Blackness begins at least in the 5th century, right? And that's not something that we get taught. It was not just the transatlantic slavery. There were multiple global chattel trades in Black folks. And it's partially how Blackness as a position and a designation is invented. And so gender violence has been crucial both to the production of gender and Blackness. And it's not new, especially when we have conversations around how Black folks live and how they are killed. It's actually an important thing to consider, particularly around how Black folks have come to understand themselves as political people. And I'm thinking a lot of what Black feminists have been saying. You could look at Shatima Threadcraft's work, or Hortense Spillers. But when Black men are killed, Black men are killed more often than Black women. That has been statistically demonstrated, and all this is difficult because of how silences are structured around Black death. But it typically happens in public, and it's a spectacle. And a lot of Black movements, particularly in the US, were able to galvanize political action and mass movements by linking Black men's death in public, particularly under police brutality, to lynching, and linking the lynching to a kind of crucifixion. And you can see this with Ida B. Wells and the anti-lynching movement and the history in the US. When Black women are killed, it is not a spectacle. It happens in private, and it happens by intimate partners and family members. And that is significant, and it's not talked about when we think about mobilizing or addressing the root of anti-Blackness and these kind of gender violences that we also, were talking about when we started this conversation. And so for me, democracy is a kind of immaterial investment that we have that gets recycled with different icons, different aspirations, and ideals that are dangerous because they have material consequences. So for me, it's not genocide, but it sustains genocidal conditions. So maybe, I think it's part of it. I think they are connected. But I also think anti-Black violence is like something that exceeds it. Like it's death at the level of spirit, not just bodies. Like it is the loss of the ability to lose worlds. There is no direct lineage to trace, right? The same way Black folks can't go band for band with white folks and non-Black folks, like we cannot go lineage for lineage. We do not know where we came from. It's not the same clear cut, I can trace 18 generations back. Some of us maybe, most of us can't. And that's also intentional, and it's part of the problem. There is no returning. I'm not necessarily a Black nationalist the way Garvey is. I'm not a Garveyite. I understand the premise, but thinking in terms of principle, like we have to update what that is. What was anti-colonial in the 60s might now be more aligned with anarchist principles in 2025. Not as a label, but in principle, what are we committed to? And that's gonna look different at different times. But I think that's the best way I could answer that.
I appreciate that, and I yield my time. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it. All power to the people.
Power to the people. Other, questions, or maybe we can come to our last question for us if you're still processing, things are percolating. I do offer subtle energy body work. It's one of my tools to address all these things that get kicked up psychosomatically. I can do that at a separate time. But I'm curious, what do you all think are the next steps? What do you want as a group in terms of conversations, or what do you think comes next for you or for us?
Well, let me let Anthony go ahead and now speak, and then we double after that. Go ahead, Anthony.
Thank you, Brother War, and thank you, Sister Brianna, for lacing us up tonight. Really appreciated the presentation. My question pertains to the reality that we're wrestling with. If in fact we are going to have to create the space that we need to survive by force, that means that we are going to have to do so with a lot of collaboration and cooperation from other groups. As we develop a Black centralized framework, are we also developing framework so that when we see allies that are willing and ready, that there's a way to provide them with some direction as to how to best show up for us? Not saying that everybody needs strict parameters, but just recognizing that sometimes there's that need, especially when there's not the cultural competency necessary to support properly.
I think it's a good question, and it's a collective answer. I think if we're interested in moving into a baseline of communal autonomy, I was like, did they leave? Okay. A baseline of communal autonomy, I think before we even decide on parameters, we'd have to get an agreement on what's an ally. And like Black folks have also allied with the earth in different ways. And you can see this with origins of, the two-step abortion pill, mifepristone. I'm not saying that right, but that pill came from Black Brazilian and Black queer sex workers who were able to figure out ulcer medication also had a plant derivative, and if you took it at particular times, it could function as an abortifacient without being legally an abortifacient, right? So what's an ally? I think that's a conversation to have. In terms of like consciousness shifting, it's a difficulty because, and I think it's part of why the emphasis is that it's not always a requirement to work with non-Black folks, because not even all Black folks agree that anti-Blackness is the root. Like there's a denial. And so I like to use a bucket analogy. It's one my dad gave me, but it's like, let's say you had, let's say you a big bucket, right? What do I mean? You got a lot of capacity, you got a lot of tools, you got a lot of things. It's like, I can show up in these range of ways for A, B, C, D, E, F needs. But you're meeting somebody and they're interested and they're like, yeah, I can show up too, but they're a little bucket. Like they got a limited set of capacity. They got two tools, right? They can do A, they can do B. They're not irrelevant, but this is their capacity. And then you might have somebody else who's like, they got capacity, but they got no boundaries. And so what you give to them is just falling through, right? And they relate to you differently. Why am I saying that? Because being in relationship with different people to meet whatever kind of need is before you is gonna have different kinds of protocols. I do think we need security protocols. I do think we have to figure out how to address the way it's showing up in our own lives if we're gonna work together well, right? And we could see this with even Panther history. Like, people will talk about Huey and they'll talk about Erica and Eldridge, but like, the same problems they were trying to address were inside, right? Huey raped Erica, and people don't talk about that with Panther history. Eldridge had that own practice too, and he talks about it in his book too, but like, dude was doing that, but then also like we need to be there for the community and feed people, right? So we have to learn how to do the work internally and develop those tools, same way we're going to do it on the outside. Yeah, I'm interested in what a Black centralized framework would look like, given the spectrum of Blackness, and it's, you know, it's diasporic, it's changing over time, like what that dynamism looks like, and which is why principles for me is really helpful, because then the way it's expressed can have that latitude, rather than like, I can only do this, right? Very rigid, very regimented. I don't think that gives us the flexibility we need. But again, I think it's a collective answer, so take what I say with a grain of salt or throw it out. Yeah.
Right on. And I think even part of going into that and historical materialism of, you know, what the Black Panther Party of self-defense was, and you know, in the part we talk about the Panther cake and where it came from with SNCC and the Lowndes County Freedom Organization, or like the whole legacy of like what the party is over time. There's a lot of takeaways from that, and that's why we lead with critique when we come to recruit training, and being very critical of how we approach, you know, that movement in particular. I like what you're closing out with the last part when we talk about like time, and the weaponization of time. You know, that would lead to believe that even that movement was, or the civil rights movement was, so long ago or irrelevant, or doesn't directly tie into what's happening now, when it's, you know, maybe a generation or two removed.
Yeah, something I think about, and I see it in schools too, because I'm like, oh my gosh, people are really addicted to these phones, and it has consequences. I think in the work, it talks about these in theoretical terms, but dude, Frantz Fanon, if anybody knows him, was a psychiatrist by practice, right? And he's looking at the consequences like PTSS, how it shows up in people's psyches. And you see some of it in the same way. It's like people are apathetic. They don't care. Like, you could show them facts, but they just want to be entertained. They want a quick bite, sound bite. They don't want to study, right? They don't want to be uncomfortable. They don't want to struggle to learn and grow in these ways. They want somebody to do it for them. They want the video to be digestible and clearly understood and simple. They don't want to challenge themselves. And that has consequences, right? In a number of ways, but.
And I think also that's somewhere, that's a tactic where we can meet people. You know, Mr. Defense or Mr. Coach Emory Douglas, like that's the reason you have the Panther figure, because literacy, like people can't digest these things at the time. We're gonna make it into a caricature. We're gonna make it cartoons. We're gonna make this digestible. We're gonna meet the people where we're at, so we can get done what we need to get done.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that holds credence too. And back to the control or owning the narrative or owning it. Like, I feel like if we can sign these social contracts amongst us, be like, hey, we're gonna hold this down and we're gonna see it through. I think even that conversation alone will get us somewhere.
Mm-hmm. I would agree. I know it's over it's past 9, so if folks have to go, that's okay. I don't have no plans, so I'm happy to stay and like talk to folks too. I think I've noticed coming into like acting out different scenarios, like when you have a crisis is not the time to get prepared. You know what I mean? Like, you practice the skills prior so that when the moment happens, you have access to your resources to do that. And now we can question why we need to be resilient, but I do feel like the amount of work we have to do is so vast. I don't think folks really understand that. And I see it every day when I'm teaching. Like, there's some people who don't know how to tell time. Like, they
don't know how to read clocks anymore.
They don't know how to explain their emotions. Like, you can't even use the tools to teach them about being reactionary and strategic responses because they don't even have that capacity yet. So the longevity we're looking for requires a range of skills working together well. And also figuring out like, how do we do this from where we are? Because you got it with your parents. You might have it in thinking about like, if you ever want to have a family, or you want to be auntie or uncle, you want to be a friend, you want to be a witness, like all of these kinds of skills are really important. But there is a difficulty because Black folks do not have control over this symbolic order. We don't. And figuring out and going into like what's going to rupture that, you see this with a lot of folks who are interested in the ties between Black revolutionary action and jazz. You can see that in different music movements as well. There is a kind of, I don't know, it's like de-petrifying yourself and being ready to improvise and act. Like you don't, I'm saying that because like something can emerge because things are always changing, that's just life. And you will just have to use whatever resources you have to act in that moment. You know what I mean? Like, it's great if we have lawyers, but there are certain things for Black people that they have no legal recourse, right? I can't trace my lineage and tell you all the places. My family comes from Trinidad, but I could get deported, even though I was born here, to El Salvador. What am I do there?
Crazy, right?
Right? So are we building tools that accept what we're saying is true? If we really believe that we don't have legal recourse, what are we doing? People are getting snatched off the street. And I'm also saying, if this is a problem of spirit, I'm not going to go talk to the person who can't tell time and say, you need to address your spirit. Like, that's not the time to do it, you know? Like, there's tact in knowing this is the scope of our problem, but right now we got to start here. And I think that's going to be varied, but it's a lot of work. I think that question around a Black centralized framework and what communal autonomy means is a really important one that we all have a piece of the answer to. You have courage to show up or answer and say what that is. I haven't heard from other folks too, so I'm curious, like, what's come up for other folks here? What, the questions others have raised?
Yes.
Right.
Hello.
Hello.
Yes. I just had a question. This necessarily doesn't have to be addressed to you, but anybody on this panel. When you talked about centralizing, I know historically that we as Black people have been with the Democratic Party. Do you think it would be disingenuous for anybody in the movement to become, let's say, like an independent or vote the other way because they feel shunned and being taken advantage of by the Democratic Party? Or is it in our best interest to stay with the Democratic Party?
Someone else want to take this before I...
Yeah, let me take it. I think what, unfortunately, Maurice, what that speaks on is actually contradicting the whole point of where the conversation is going, from the standpoint of realizing that talking about a system that is at its foundation is not going to be in our best interest. That does not mean that what we can't do is help ruffle the feathers or help address some of the immediate things that we can do to make things better for us. But what we have to realize is that we're not in this fight to make it comfortable to be oppressed. We're not in this fight to make it more agreeable to take the poison. And so at this point, what we're talking about is identifying the fact that we are being poisoned. So when you talk about that red pill and that blue pill analogy, it goes back to this. Do you accept the fact that this is where we are? If not, then you see why you would be okay with wanting to just take lower poison. But for those that recognize that the path is poisonous, then there is no compromise. There is no point of thinking that, well, I can make a difference within that framework, when the framework itself as a foundation is not in the best interest of humanity. Now, I'm not going to even just simply say what we're talking about with blackness and anti-blackness. I'm going to say it's a destructive path for humanity, period. And I'm going to leave it at that. Rick got his hand up as well. Let's let Rick jump in.
Hi, my name's Rick. I'm a Comanche Nation citizen, and I have a master's in native law. You talk about the colonial matrix. Do you have any recommended readings about the colonial matrix in general? And the reason I ask is because I've read about, I don't know if you know about Walter Mignolo's concept of colonial matrix, but I kind of have a beef with that, or critique with that, because Walter Mignolo's white. And he's talking about decolonization, and a lot of people center Mignolo's voice in decolonization. I have a problem with that. He says a lot of problematic things, but he does talk about the colonial matrix. I don't know if you have any other resources about that. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Let me see if I can put the readings in the chat for you as well. The articles that I was referencing tonight. I think there's a lot. I mean, if you've done research, there's always a ton that you can read. But the two that I shared, one is by João Costa Vargas. Oh, here you go, in the chat. These are helpful, I think, in building that structural analysis. There's also a book that's literally called Anti-Blackness, published by Duke, came out in 2021. I think Hortense Spiller's Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe, but even that whole volume could be helpful. The Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe came out in 1987. There's the Combahee River Collective Statement. That could be a good one for us to revisit too. There's Radicalizing Feminism by Joy James, came out in 2010, talking about the spectrum of Black feminisms and giving a clear set of criteria for what is revolutionary in terms of principle. You could look at the Mau Mau Rebellion. They have their own kind of action plan. Yeah, I could go on, but there's lots that I'd be happy to share. I've shared the two I referenced in the chat. And to Maurice's question too, the reading by Warren was engaging that question of Black folks' fidelity to the Democratic Party and its consequences. We kind of got to unpack some of that earlier. I would say though that the resistance to question is as much a part of this work as it is our agreement that that's not it, right? So it's not even that people are voting, it's like you have no action behind it. Like if you vote this person in because they're gonna do A, B, C, and D, and then you don't even try to hold that accountable, what are you doing, right? And so with the red pill, blue pill, at the very bottom, it said, oh yes, we can have them emailed. They, for centering racism means you're centering white people, and then everybody else is lumped into one kind of slightly different but related form of oppression. The solution then is radical transformation, right? Let's just get a better democracy. Let's just get a more socialist kind of democracy, right? Not really taking all of it away, the structure just looks a little bit different. Versus, we understand that Blackness is what makes this world work. Without it, nothing would be able to function the way it does. Capitalism would not be what it is, right? And that's a whole, we could study that too. The solution there is we need to keep this system done, right? The first one, we need a better democracy. The war machine is still going. This is the imperialist core, which means we also have a very particular relationship to America. We think we have the right to keep this land. We don't belong anywhere. There's nowhere to go back to. The world has changed. And there's nowhere to go. You can't go to Mars, you can't go back to Africa. Everywhere you go, there it is.
And Rick does a very good political education on that, and I appreciate him for the one he did on that. And this reminds me of something that Daruba Ben Wahad brought up about the ability to have power and the ability to impose a consequence, and the lack of power being from an inability to pose consequence on any action that has against your people. So I think we get lost in the sauce sometimes with the strategy and the tactics of what that means, and everyone wants to put a finger to it. but I think it's a more nuanced conversation. But I think more things. I'm a fan of brilliance in the basics. So the more we could break down in a very like basic level and just like be on point with certain points, that'll give us in the right direction. I'm a fan of because I think a lot of things can get diluted with the a myriad of things, language, whatever, what have you, perspective, all these things. Um, but we can define phenomena and make it act in a desired manner. We can define these things, can draw a beeline to like, all right, well, can you impose any consequences against the violence that's happening against you? No. Okay, then you might need to revisit your power base. Yeah, I think there's a lot of brilliance in the basics. And shout out Comrade Rick for the political education on Black sovereignty, because that opened my mind up to a whole different thing with because we can't be colonizers, like we can't. We're brought here involuntarily, like that's just not in the cards. So I think he's gonna get into that. So I'll let Comrade Rick speak.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, what your thoughts on like the concept of New Africa, because I got into, as a Native person, I went to, study for Native law to study our sovereignty, and how it fits into decolonization. And I felt like, when we talk about decolonization, there's a piece missing, and that piece is the sovereignty of like the descendants of the Africans that were brought here, right? Forcefully through colonization. I really do feel like there's that's a conversation that's missing, and I feel like that nationhood, I mean, sovereignty in general, there's 574 indigenous nations just on the US. It doesn't include Canada or Mexico. There's even more, right? And just plugging in another nation is actually not that hard for me, in my point of view. And I think that's I really want to thank you for your lecture. It has a lot of, I mean, this is a conversation I feel like politically not a lot of people are educating on, and I'm really grateful for it. But yeah, but what are your thoughts about like the concept of New Africa or your sovereignty?
Pending, to be brief, but I don't know enough about the New Africa discourse to really speak on it. I will say I'm still even thinking through sovereignty, because a lot of the way that I understand it, for me, sovereignty is an archetype of war. It's like the ultimate expression of boundaries in war. And I am interested in a model of interdependence, and I think I can notice that limit when you see land back initiatives, right? So structurally, and Wilderson 2010, the Red, White, and Black book also argues this. It's not a new argument, but in that he also echoes what I'm about to say, which is there's a difference for indigenous groups when they argue sovereignty and land back versus when they argue genocide. And one is a reinvention of nationhood, which is antagonistic because the production of the state, as we know it now, requires anti-Blackness to be stabilized. Even that position, right? Indigeneity is a relationship to the state. And land, capital L, as property and home and belonging, which Black folks don't have. And even in now, when you listen to land back acknowledgements, they never acknowledge slavery. And they never acknowledged the non-native ecologies, which included people that were brought here. And it's never there. I'm curious if you've ever heard one that does. Maybe I missed it because I'm not everywhere. But I've never heard it. I've never even heard people question that, right? And so that's an assumption with sovereignty. I don't think that's a solution for Black folks, which means that also has implications for the thing we call self-determination. But these are thoughts I'm still working out. Again, I don't know that much about New Africa to really speak on it, so I'm not going to try and do that. Let me get more educated on that, and I'll come back to you.
Oh, that's a really,
But
yeah, it's a really
this,
good point. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, Rick, I actually wanted her to kind of build on your discussion with her. This is really exciting for me, actually. Um, so as we talk about land acknowledgement and the potential of land back, regardless of what form or theory that takes, what are some of your hesitancies with supporting a land back effort?
I think I have more questions than resistance. I think it's skepticism that I have. Like, what are people invested in here in maintaining? Because even with indigeneity, there are Black folks in Africa who are, quote, indigenous, but our conceptualization of indigeneity is non-Black. So the argument for sovereignty is an extension of that investment. And so I'm skeptical of like, what, is it just gonna be revamped like the human 2.0? And I think like when people talk about decolonization, they don't talk about doing away with the human. They're still invested in the human, in its modern archetype. And that requires the same categorization. You just like don't want people to feel the discomfort of being oppressed. It's like, you know what I mean? Like it's not truly non-hierarchical. I do support efforts to get land. Like a lot of my work and understanding with gender-based violence and the production of anti-Blackness is not just from my own family's experiences in Trinidad and the US, but the work I've been doing in East Africa and Kenya. And I have been working in Mathare constituency, which is considered an informal settlement. It's the created through and now has the generations after Mau came together to rebel against British occupation in Kenya. And so they're not recognized as a city. They're still fighting for that, still fighting for land that has been stolen from them and occupied by other kinds of ethnic groups, Indian folks, Asian folks who are also plantation masters in Kenya alongside white settlers. And so their efforts are both a consequence of how gender oppression and sexual terror structures their family life and their judicial systems as well as how imperialism has affected this space. And so their efforts to get land are also a critique of indigeneity as we, in the more mainstream are talking about it and deploying it. And they're trying to get their material needs met. Like their efforts are, I guess be direct with it. They are interested in ending parliament, right? They have a different orientation to it. Like they're interested in continental repair, to put it briefly. That's a fraught term, not a term they use, but it's just part of what I'm seeing. And there's also differences in like some will deploy that and also don't see themselves as Black, and some do. And so this like Black diasporic relationality is so complex, and I don't know if sovereignty actually helps, because sovereignty requires rights to be acknowledged and respected and to be human. And Black folks are barred from that. So to me, it doesn't work. Same reason folks don't accept it as genocide, and we saw this both with the UNHCR, the Human Rights Commission, and the 1951, like we charged genocide, fell flat. We're seeing that now with multiple genocides. You know what I mean? So I just don't, to me it seems like it's a revamping of the same thing. I think the radical thing is that at some point we have to collectively decide that we're gonna have to do away with Blackness, or it's gonna be an all Black everything. Like, it's Earth. Why are we paying for grapes? We can't go anywhere. We all here. All the time. Always. I don't get it. Like, I think there's a different model of interdependence that we'd have to be willing to commit to than sovereignties and borders in these particular ways. Like, the nations and investments in sovereignty, to me, is how we got here.
Professor Simmons, I'd like to ask you a question.
Sure. Rick
this is,
also has their
yeah,
hand up, and I don't know if.
Oh no, I can wait. I don't want to interrupt.
Okay.
yeah, so this is William X again. My lineage background is a country you might have heard of one time. It's called Rhodesia, and also Nigeria, which reciprocity came in through Texas, where our family settled. My whole background looking at the question I would like to ask you is which I was raised in the non-violent state of the 50s and 60s through the violent state of the 50s and 60s. To ask you, do you see history repeating itself as you see it in the 21st century as we look at now? And I do agree with you that we do have to get rid of the blackness aspect of it, because to me, it doesn't serve any purpose in the last 500 years to the last 5,000 years. But do you see a change, a fundamental change, that blood will be spilled if democracy as a whole within the United States of America does not change its pattern of how it's dealing with the people, the will of the people, as you see it today? I yield my time.
I'm thinking. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Blood is already being spilled. We are the blood sacrifice. That is already being paid almost in perpetuity. Like, I don't think. So again, thinking at the level of principle, democracy is what it is. Whether it has a black face like Obama or it has Trump's face, it is what it is. So I don't think that can be changed. You either are doing that thing or you're not. Is history repeating itself? I would say in a lot of ways, yes. To me, the way that I explain anti-blackness is through the visual of a fractal. Does anyone see that? A fractal before? You can see it as a kind of self-repeating pattern, right? And it continues to a somewhat undefined limit. It follows a particular set of rules and recreates itself, right? So it's self-replicating. This grammar, the set of protocols is based in a core set of things, rules, principles, values, right? And then it revamps itself and it replicates. So what does that mean? You could have it like, I wish I have a video for it, but I'll try and draw it out. Right? So I just drew a bunch of stars over and over and over. And let's say this thing is the star fractal, and this is a fractal of anti-blackness. When you look at it, it's like, oh yeah, that's a bunch of stars repeating. But when you go up close and it's like, oh, I'm here in Brazil and this is what I experienced. And then someone's over here and they're like, but it's like this in Kenya. And they're like, well, it's free and clear out here in Iceland, right? And so you're all experiencing it in different ways, but it's organized by the same principle. It's still the star fractal, right? You just feel it in a different way than I feel it over here and you feel it over there in the south. And so it gets deeper ingrained, and it's part of why even racial relations are so regional, right? You could be a white Argentinian person and then come here and now you're considered brown, right? But it's the same organizing principle. It's just expressed in different ways in different localities. So yeah, I think it's repeating itself. It's like a Cadillac, 2025, it's got a new version. Fascism 3.0, here you go. Woo woo. You know what I mean?
Thank you very much.
Go ahead, Rick, and then we're gonna have to work on closeout. And Brianna, before we move forward, I do want to say that me and you will be definitely touching base and seeing how we can connect with this on the face-to-face.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to say that, I do agree with you. The whole thing of sovereignty,
Oh,
there's a
yeah.
whole critique from indigenous peoples of Westphalian sovereignty, which is very Eurocentric in a sense. So we're having conversations but I think this is why it's important for us, our communities, um, you know, uh, the Black community and the Native community to get together and bridge, build that bridge for decolonization on this continent. Because Black to me, Black history and Black sovereignty, it transcends two different continents, the two whole continents here. I mean, the Atlantic slave trade, brought Africans for all of North America and all of South America, right? And I agree with you with the whole indigeneity thing too, because there was the article. I don't know if you heard of it. Decolonization is not a metaphor, and it painted Africans that were brought here separate from indigenous, even though they were indigenous as well. So it was like anti-black in nature, that article, right? And there was a whole article critiquing about that. But I think yeah, I 100% agree with you. So I think this is a very important conversation, and thank you so much for bringing it up. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And I think even like that question is difficult too, because there's also been moments of solidarity, like in indigenous languages, they didn't always have the name for Black people's position, and that has been invented as an extension of like, we don't have control over the symbolic order. Now you all have a name for this position. And at the same time, like there have been moments of collaboration where there was agreement that we're gonna help each other survive, or we're also gonna fight alongside one another. And that messiness is in there. It's not always so clear cut as like, this works for us, this doesn't. But I do think it's a serious question. Yeah. So I know it's 9:30. I'm gonna respect everybody's time. Any next steps or requests from folks? If you're needing aftercare, you can reach out too.
Brianna, definitely make sure we'll continue the dialogue and the discussion, and whether it be on Zoom as well as in person, to do some things more local in regards to this. But with that, let's just go ahead and close out. Again, I will make sure everyone gets the information based upon sending your email in the chat. And like we talked about, make sure you give me the slides as well. But we'll keep this going.
Sounds good. Thank you for the opportunity and for sticking around, everyone.
All right. All power to the people, everyone.
All power to the people.